describes himself as an Austrian, and maintains that we are here thanks to the Führer. He barters with the Americans using watches and rings from our comrades, and only returns a small part of the provisions he receives to those starving comrades who gave up their valuables. Later you can go with me and, if the opportunity arises, get acquainted with the American master sergeant who runs the entire store here. We consider him a rough fellow, but behind his rough exterior there is hidden the soul of a child which frequently pushes to the surface. Look over there. The completely rotten Austrian is raising his hand. That is the sign for the first 3 compounds to come and get their provisions. We must wait until he gives the sign a second time. Otherwise he will put off the distribution for an hour, or we will not get anything at all. Schultz ends his lecture, and with no shortage of volunteers, appoints 11 men to receive the provisions. Finally, the men come out of the American tents with boxes on their shoulders, and follow in a file down the main street of the camp, along which all of the compounds are located. Ready to move out, the 11 of us wait at the compound exit for the sign from the bearded one at the gate. When it comes, we move out in line and are joined by groups from compounds 12 and 13. How many men are there in compound 12? Genghis Khan receives Schultz with a domineering voice. In turn, Schultz holds his list written on the cement sack paper under his nose. How is it that you have 247 men today, and there are only 244 on mine? He asks Schultz bitingly. I added 3 men to my list last night from the new transport, Schultz calmly answers. They are not on my list. He hisses and looks searchingly for help toward the tents from which a tall, broad-shouldered American steps toward them. What is the matter? He asks the spokesman. In fluent English, the Austrian explains the situation. Where are the men now? The American giant turns to the like-proportioned Schultz. Quickly, my friends and I raise our hands. It's okay. The men are shaved and can't have been here very long, the Yankee observes keenly and disappears inside the tent. It's all right this time, Genghis Khan finally responds, hard-bitten, and clears the way to the tent. The next time the lists must agree or you will get nothing. Is that your food, perhaps, that the Americans are so stingy with anyway, you damned dog? Schultz replies with considered calm and leads us into the tent. Camp. In the half-darkness inside the tent, the American master sergeant stands and sovereignly directs the German workers who pile up boxes of provisions on a rough-hewn long table. In dog-like submission and nearly overcome with fatigue, they wipe the drops of sweat from their faces after placing the provisions on the boards. Unstirred, the American observes them and rolls up his shirt sleeves, disclosing a row of German wristwatches which stretch from his wrist to his elbow. Like a child richly endowed by Santa Claus, he looks proudly and happily at his store of watches. It is out of the question that these Americans are aware of this injustice which they have perpetrated, and how they have violated the Geneva Convention in taking these wristwatches. Otherwise, they would not display them so openly. Let's go. He pulls me out of my contemplation, pointing with his red-lacquered stick to the tent exit, and I follow my comrades with empty hands. As useless as a spotlight on a bright day, I follow at the tail end of the column along the street, allowing my eyes to focus on the individual enclosures which do not differ in any way from each other. Everywhere German prisoners in dirty uniforms and beard-covered faces stand or lie waiting impatiently for the arrival of their food carriers. Ask the comrades to line up in 2 rows, Schultz calls after we reach the middle of the compound. Helmut, you did not carry anything. Please oversee the distribution and see that the comrades leave once they get their cans, so that they don't come back to the feed bag twice. Otherwise, at the end, there will be nothing left for you. He instructs me in this thankless assignment the way a veteran would handle a new recruit. Since my meal depends upon making sure that no one gets 2 rations, like a watchdog, I observe each individual as he receives the cans from Briller and Schultz until he sits down someplace in the compound to eat. Here, watchman, you did a good job. Schultz throws me the last 2 cans after all 246 men have been fed. Finally, we can sit down to eat. At least the Americans here have given us a can opener so that we can quickly get to the contents of the cans. This time we have potatoes, yellow beans and meat in the heavy can, while the lighter can contains 4 cookies, coffee and candy. Instead of acting like wild animals over this little bit of cold food, we keep an eye on Schultz, who takes a spoon out of the pocket of his field blouse and begins to eat with perfect manners like a cultured gentleman. After I stick 2 fingers into the can and shamelessly shove the solid mass of potatoes into my mouth, Brille and Hocker go after their cans, and in a few minutes everything is gone. If you don't have a spoon, then of must eat with your fingers. Schultz laughs and wipes his silver spoon on a clump of grass. Aren't you tormented by hunger, Schultz? After this thimbleful of food you blink so cheerfully in the sun? I ask the huge man in amazement, while inside my stomach, still racked with hunger pains, a crazy struggle for the few calories is underway. Do you believe that I would become full if I constantly talk and think about food? Naturally, I have hunger like a lumberjack, but it is better if you don't talk about it and instead lie down so that you don't use up your strength, he answers, reclining on his back. Let's have a smoke and then lie down ourselves. Hocker wrinkles his nose and points with his chin toward Schultz, whom he seems to regard as an unsympathetic snob. Although Schultz's blameless manner strikes me as somewhat exaggerated, I still have a considerable measure of respect for him. The man is perhaps 15 years older than we, but in any case he is much further ahead in practical wisdom. How old are you, Comrade Schultz? I ask. In December I will be 43 if nothing comes up, he answers with a yawn. You are from the area around Hanover? I explore further. Yes, but how did you know that? He asks, sitting up. Lie back down, I can tell by your accent. So. He seems calm, but you don't seem to have an accent. What corner of the world are you from? Schwaben? I am from Baden, also Hocker, but Brille is from the east. I was just born there. Brille joins in our relaxed conversation as we close our eyes and allow the sun to shine on our dirty faces. Most of my time was spent in the Reich. Later I married in my homeland and I still have a residence there. It seems that you aren't happy with your wife, Hocker babbles out indiscreetly. For a long time I have felt Brille's secret sorrow without once poking at the wound. It was a disappointment, but otherwise not so bad. Brille communicates bitterly after a painful moment. Now you know why I have led all the women around by the nose. With every whore who looked like my wife, I used all of the charm at my disposal until she was eating out of my hand and willing to renounce any payment. Then I went to bed with her so that in the morning I could leave her cold-blooded. He divulges as though a long-plugged well is just unstopped. He then turns over and remains silent. We too fall into brooding silence. At 3 p.m. we are scared out of a dull sleep. Tired and worn out, we bring our exhausted bodies to our painful feet, which have not been out of our boots for over a week. We finally receive water. A truck loaded with gas cans filled with water stands on the street, and within seconds is surrounded by the thirsty prisoners. Like a rooster watching out for his hens, Schultz stalks out of the compound where he receives 2 cans of water from Genghis Khan and personally carries them to the middle of the camp. Automatically the inmates form up in 2 lines, 3 steps apart, with cans in their hands. However, things do not proceed without friction. There are outsiders in this camp, but they are quickly brought to reason with a kick. A long-time prisoner describes to me the provision under which Schultz accepted the position of camp spokesman. Whoever cannot accept the discipline and order here must go to another compound. Naturally, we receive our small can of warm water last. Schultz, who is much more familiar with American provisions than we, laughs as we cuss about the temperature of the water and takes a packet of coffee out of his pocket. Grinning at us, he pours the coffee into his can and stirs it with his spoon. Then, as though anticipating the pleasure, he brings the can to his mouth and with small sips lets the contents run down his throat. "That's the way to do it, you greenhorns," he triumphs over our amazed faces. "Ja, does the rat poison taste good without being boiled?" we ask nearly at the same time. "Just try it. The Americans are a step ahead of us, and besides, something like this is not possible with our stuff." He answers our question in a good mood. Quickly we fish out our packs of coffee and follow his example. He is right. The stuff tastes like coffee at Aunt Agatha's on a Sunday afternoon. Somewhat stimulated by the coffee, we saunter around the compound and spy into the neighbouring enclosure, in which non-commissioned officers are also housed. But the view offers only a little diversion. Shortly before 5 p.m, the whistle sounds for roll call, which surprises us 3 newcomers. "What does that mean?" I ask Schultz in amazement. "It is just part of the daily routine and doesn't mean much. The Americans just want to make sure how many are interned, but they find out only when the French bring some back to the camp so that they can collect their bounty. Take it easy and keep in line." I listen to Schultz's advice. "Is it possible to escape from here?" I ask. "It is possible, but the chance of getting by outside the fence is pretty slim. Besides, from here it is a long way to the front, and the French are after every German they see," he answers me. "And they get a bounty when they turn in escaped prisoners?" I ask further. "That's what they tell us when they are brought back," he explains shortly, and pulls me along to the camp street, where the men are forming up in 5 rows for roll call. "The faster it goes, the faster we get our 2 cans, Schultz whispers after we have taken our positions. That is why, I think, the huge group hurries so quickly into formation. After 30 minutes, Genghis Khan appears with the American Master Sergeant and separates the entire assembly into groups of 50, while some of the wisecrackers have all kinds of fun with him. Since Genghis Khan goes ahead of the American Hercules and takes responsibility for the division, it is great fun for the jokers to quickly change places after they have been separated, so that when the count is checked, instead of 50 men, there are 49 or 54. This brings a reprimand from the Americans to the most hated man in the camp, and the whole crew enjoys it with satanic joy. Of course, the count is delayed considerably, and the starving men worry about their small cans, although after they eat them, they are more hungry than before. 3 US officers enter the camp. Genghis Khan steps into the row, and the Master Sergeant calls, "Attention," and reports. The rosters are compared. Minutes later, the officers stride along the front row and inspect the compounds. A quick glance is enough to find that they are in order. "Do you believe that the count is correct?" Schultz asks me out of the corner of his mouth. "I have no idea," I answer, amazed at his question. "Tomorrow we will stand in the 5th row, and then you can see how the prisoners deceive the Americans," he grins maliciously. Exactly 6:20 p.m. Hocker reports the time as Genghis Khan announces the count is over and dismisses the gigantic group. After about an hour, we sit next to one another and devour our hunger rations. 7 days have passed since we ate our last warm meal by the madame in the village near Soissons. 7 days? Unbelievable. It seems like an eternity. Pondering, I look at Hocker's face while my tired hands let the empty can drop. How small the fellow has become in these 7 days. Deep shadows lie under his eyes which look at the world so sadly. What would one of the doves from Soissons now say if they could see him? In all likelihood they would spit at him just like nearly all French are doing today. Man, what miserable creatures we are. "Are you daydreaming again?" Brilla tears me from my thoughts when I do not react to his joke about a thimbleful of beans. The less they give us to eat, the harder we must become. He thinks he must strengthen my resolve. "This time you are certainly right, Robert," I agree with him. "We must become bone hard because our flesh will certainly disappear with these miserable provisions. Then that has its good side, because when the trumpets of Jericho blow on Judgment Day to sound the resurrection of the flesh, we can lie still since we consist only of bones." Schultz humorously follows the logic of our doubtful situation. We laugh about it. Hocker joins in the topic. But one thing is crystal clear. With what the Americans have given us during the past days, we will not survive past October. "Then let's make out our wills," I mock him and pull out my fountain pen. 30 minutes later, we are asleep. In an unconscious state, we are free of thoughts about our situation and our sorrowful existence. The 3rd of September, 1944. Crashing thunder and quivering lightning open the new day. With fearful hearts, we sit and look into the sky at the cloud banks that are piling up and are being driven eastward by a strong wind. God be merciful toward us and let this bitter cup pass by us. is the hope of thousands of prisoners in the Alençon camp. Woe to us if the sky now opens its sluices and sends rain to soak these meadows and fields, where, surrounded by barbed wire and unprotected, we are subject to the weather. No drop of rain has fallen. Still, the force of nature hesitates and seems to be in conflict with itself. In any case, we must dig a drain ditch around our camping place. Schultz brings our attention toward the sky back to earth as he begins to loosen the grass with his spoon, like a little boy playing in a sandbox. Listlessly, my gaze hangs on the little tool, while my brain moves lazily in thinking about the amount of work that such an undertaking requires. And still the three of us follow his example and begin to scratch with cans a small ditch around our camping place. In the course of time, we become enthused about our progress and work with more inspiration to dig deeper into the soil until we are satisfied with what we have accomplished. We lie our tools down and sink exhausted upon Schultz's coat, which he has spread out for us. In the meantime, the wind has blown the clouds into shreds and driven the threatening weather eastward. Individual sunbeams shine out from the grotesque images in the eastern sky. Around us, comrades hesitatingly follow our example and now stand in the middle of their work with one group trying to outdo another. The American guards stand at the fence with grinning faces and observe the digging Germans. "It's 12 o'clock, Briller announces the time as we get in line, and Schultz returns with 10 carriers. "Soon we will have food, you fidgety Heine." I grin at Hocker, who nervously shifts from one leg to another. "If we could just get full only once, then I would sleep all day long and would not have to trouble my brain with finding a way out." He laughs tiredly to me. "Haven't your efforts been rewarded? I mean, whoever searches so carefully for a way out must sooner or later come to a resolution," I ask him jokingly. And then I am ashamed of myself that I might have angered the fellow. But he does not indicate any concern. Instead, he suddenly bends to me trustingly and whispers in my ear, "Yes, I have a way out. Tonight we will sneak into the provisions tent and steal a whole box. You don't need to do anything more than stand as a lookout and take the chest for me. Before it is light, we will have eaten it all and buried the remains." "You are crazy, Willie," I respond. "The tent is guarded, and Genghis Khan and his helpers sleep inside the tent. Get that thought out of your head." "Then I will do it alone." He remains firm. "That is all we need, that you throw yourself to the dogs by such a hopeless act of despair. Do I have to play nursemaid tonight so that my old companion doesn't do anything foolish?" I growl. Somewhat disappointed at my words, he avoids my gaze. But from this moment on, I know that he is in danger. Once he has planned something, he will transform it into action. From now on, I must pay attention to the fellow. I clearly remember the same look on his face by the entrance to the hotel in Soissons, when we needed the bicycles to get out of the village. It is the same face which in broad daylight and with weapons made its way through front yards of blooming flowers in the enemy village and pushed on to the nearby grove of trees. This obstinate mouth is the same one that counselled Briller to hold the old man under the water until he became calm. Empty. "Schultz, is it possible to secure a box from the provisions tent without being shot full of lead?" I ask, much to Hocker's surprise in the quiet afternoon. "You are wasting your time thinking about that. Let me tell you of an episode that occurred here shortly before your arrival," he explains, as though he had expected the question. "I will make it short," he begins. "The thought to get full at the source comes up quicker than anything. It is no wonder that the second night after the tent was set up, a break-in followed. The fellows went to work carefully. Like snakes, they worked their way past the guards to the back of the tent and loosened 2 of the tent stakes. Calmly, they made their way inside the tent and took 3 boxes of sea rations and brought them back undisturbed to their compound. But one committed a serious mistake. Out of pure arrogance, he took the guard's rifle that was leaning against the tent. At the same time, a second group of prisoners was on its way to the tent, and they had no idea that they were following behind the others. They arrived at the tent shortly before the relief guard detachment, and they were discovered by the Americans who were searching for the rifle. You can imagine what an uproar that caused. Still, the second group escaped and reached the first compound, where the men worked their way through the barbed wire back into their own compound. The first group took advantage of the spectacle. They cut their way through the 2 rolls of concertina with stolen wire cutters and took off with the rifle. And if they haven't died, then they are alive today. Hocker interrupts Schultz's story with an unbelieving smile. I can almost believe that, Schultz continues undisturbed, but the entire camp had to suffer through 2 hard days. Not only did the Americans dig up every mole-hole in the compounds, but we didn't get any provisions. Since then, the camp spokesman and his helpers sleep in the tent, and the guards shoot at every mouse that moves in the area of the tent at night. If you want to commit suicide and burden the camp with additional suffering, go right ahead. I have nearly forgotten my hunger. Hocker kids him further. Haven't you heard what is waiting for us up there? I try to straighten him out. I am going to see for myself how watchful the Americans are, he throws out, getting up to go to the latrine. He will try it for sure, Briller flusters, dispirited, and stomps an innocent can with the heel of his boot. From now on, we will have to keep an eye on him at night, I whisper to Briller. The boy is not that dumb that he will run blindly into destruction, Schultz protests strongly. You don't know him, Briller speaks to him. He was the best reconnaissance patrol leader in the entire battalion, and whatever the fellow gets in his head, he will carry out. You can be sure of that. Tonight, let's go as food carriers and take a close look at this future scene of action, I suggest. Perhaps he will come to our point of view, or perhaps there is a possibility to get to the fodder trough. It is all nonsense, Schultz interjects. Don't think that you are the most cold-blooded among the 15,000 men here. I will sell the coat to fill you up, and that is all. Others don't have a coat, and they have not frozen. I would just like to know how our dear comrades are doing in the Russian prison camps when the civilized Americans allow us to starve. Briller seems to be asking the Almighty. My own thoughts wander to the Eastern Front. Briller's question is nearly as complicated as the question asked by all of mankind about what will happen in the afterlife. In both cases, no one has returned to give an answer. But I know one thing for sure. Just as the curious could transport themselves to the other side through suicide and will not do it, I do not want to change my place in an American prison camp with one in a Russian camp. Although I know a number of comrades who are in Russian captivity, I am thankful that fate has kept me out of the hands of the Russians and from perishing on the endless steppes or tundra. Hocker joins us again and lies down silently next to me. Either he has given up his intentions, or the decision still stands anchored in his unconsciousness. Whatever, a nearly cheerful glow radiates from his small, sun-tanned face. We must look for other possibilities to get some more food, I whisper to him, in order to find out his secret and not to disturb our slumbering friends. Oh, let's forget about it and close your eyes. Then your stomach will think it is night and leave you in peace, he explains softly as he closes his eyelids. So that's it, I conclude, and turn over onto my stomach to take a nap. The loud sound of engines in the sky disturbs my sleep. Oh, now they are taking part in the war again, Schultz mumbles, half asleep, surrendering to fate. Is there an airfield close by? I ask, observing a transport in the sky. Yes, from here the Americans send food and supplies to the front, he explains sleepily. Around 5 o'clock, a gentle kick wakes me from my short midday nap. Time for roll call, an ill-tempered passerby explains to me. Let's go to roll call. I wake my friends and then stand up stretching and yawning toward the sun. Once again we shuffle along the camp street and foully hang back in the last row. This time I observe the play with Genghis Khan and enjoy it immensely. I only wonder where these guys have the desire to undertake such mischief, since it does cost a great deal of energy to crawl on all fours as fast as possible through the rows and endure a painful kick or two given in anger by humorless prisoners. In response to my question about this, Schultz shrugs his shoulders, noting, "They are the ones who know how to live here among us. There is no shortage of provisions for them here. For the bashful prisoners who still have something, they act as intermediaries, or they rub dried shit into dust and sell it for cacao. The devil only knows what they already have behind them. In any case, in the present situation, they stand above us. We must fit in, Schultz, and not wait until the fried doves fly into our mouths. It is the strong ones that survive such times." I offer reproach about our inactivity. Don't confuse the issue, Helmut. The street dogs are those who nourish themselves from garbage and keep above water that way. I will bet you that these fellows grew up in the poorest of circumstances, if not in an orphanage or a boarding school. If someone perishes here, it is the intelligent ones. It does not have to be hunger that kills them, but the spiritual depression that finishes off useful people behind barbed wire. That is foreign to these fellows. Either they never did have it, or it was stifled at a very early age. He corrects me with father-like sympathy. After the distribution of the water, Schultz slowly stirs the powdered coffee in his clean can. Like an animal of prey, Hocker watches Schultz's hand, which holds the much-desired spoon. Schultz is oblivious to his surroundings and lost in his anticipation of the drink. Just in time, I notice Hocker's fluttering nostrils, which indicate an imminent explosion that threatens to disturb our good situation. Without speaking a word, I take the spoon out of Schultz's hand and pass it to Hocker. Stir your own coffee first, Helmut. Some people maintain that they think about others, but in practice it seems to be different. He cannot resist this biting observation. Amazed, Schultz looks at Hocker, but only shakes his head and drinks the first swallow of coffee. After we hold the empty cans in our hands and are feeling sorry for ourselves, I conclude that the moment has come to offer a serious word to my companions in order to avoid future dissension. How would it be, I tear them from their lethargy, if in the future we undertake to treat each other with better manners and more consideration, as is common among most human beings, rather than allowing every trifle to cause trouble among us? Nearly every hour we look at others and see how minor the causes of their strife are and laugh about it. Naturally, our own nerves have been severely tested with what we have experienced and are considerably weakened by the lack of nourishment under which we are now suffering. But for reasonable men who understand one another, that cannot be justification for any more senseless confrontations which only make life more intolerable. Yes, that's my opinion. Schultz supports me immediately. It is just that I don't want to insert myself into your group since you've known one another much longer. I regret it every time I spout off, I continue. That is the reason that I would like to prevent it in the future. I see by your last words that this topic is not directed toward me alone. Hocker takes up the thread I have spun, which is intended to give us a better grip on ourselves. But everyone should have understanding for those who, despite everything, still bust their necks. Agreed. In the future, we will conduct ourselves how we all wish it to be. Briller joins in. The 4th of September, 1944. He has dared do it. Hocker is in the tent. I shake the unknowing sleepers awake with my ice-cold voice. Are you crazy? Damn it all! Schultz hisses, ugly, while Briller, like in a dream, pulls his boots toward him. We must go look for him, he mumbles as though we were once again at the front. Have you all lost your good sense? Schultz bleats, whom I can sense more than see while I put on my boots. Stay here and wait until we come back, Schultz, I whisper to him, and follow Briller out of the compound. Without a word, we leave the compound exit. Crouching, we make our way separately along both sides of the camp road to the main road, where we are reunited. Only the glow of a burning cigarette gives away the location of the guard. Every nerve is strained to the breaking point, but we remain in our place. Minutes pass like hours, but the tent and its surroundings protect its secret. It seems that nature herself is holding her breath, as the hellish darkness and graveyard stillness lie in a wide circle where more than 15,000 souls are cut off from the outer world and are dreaming of better times. I don't believe any more that he went into the tent, Briller whispers into my ear. I can feel it, Robert. He is inside, I whisper back. Then I will take a look, he sounds quietly. Stay here. If you meet him, you will irritate him. He does not suspect that we are following him. We must wait here in case the guard notices him, and then we can help him. I dissuade Briller from his proposal. You are right, Helmut. The only threat is from the guard, so we must get closer to the fellow so that we can hinder him from shooting if it is necessary. We work our way to within 5 steps of the guard, who yawns loudly and flips his cigarette butt into the grass. Then a barely perceptible shadow glides past us to the right and changes directions at the main road. Follow him, I will cover you, Brilla whispers, not allowing any contradiction. Faster than the shadow, I follow the way back and wait at the main road, leaning against a post. Minutes later, Hocker appears like a black panther at the post across from me, and breathing deeply, comes to a stop. "Psst, Willie," I chirp, barely detectable across the road, and the shadow immediately collapses into itself. After I call for a second time, he answers and cautiously approaches my hiding place. "Did you really notice that I disappeared?" he whimpers. "Robert is lying right by the guard. We must bring him back," I indicate, half in anger. "I only have a pail of lard. The bread is still behind the tent. I must get it." The little robber exhales happily and departs silently like a butterfly in the night. It is still dark, but the relief guard could come, or the guard could hit upon the idea to go behind the tent. I concentrate all my senses in watching the guard, considering what I would do in his position. Since a sergeant is always prone to criticism, I find the guard's behaviour rather careless. Certainly he believes that his superiors have disturbed his night's rest out of pure meanness, because the damned Germans have lost all desire to visit the tent at night since the last attempt. That is the only explanation why the fellow, acting in obvious boredom, continues to yawn loudly and spit on the tent wall and other places. In an emergency, it would be an easy task for Brilla to pull the legs out from under the fellow with a sudden jerk, bring him down on his face, and cover his mouth with bare hands to cut off the air. Forgetting his duty, the guard lights another cigarette. The flickering flame of the lighter lights his face for a second. He then snaps the lid shut. That would have been the right moment to make him pay for his carelessness. At such moments of weakness, soldiers die day and night on all fronts, on all sides. Even I am infected by his carelessness, and I feel an almost uncontrollable desire to leave a calling card for the fellow. But Hocker creeps up to us like a dark breath and saves us all from my arrogance. The pitch-black night is about to change into a blue-grey colour, as Hocker makes his way on knees and elbows with a box in his hand, past the main road, and with no trouble follows the barbed wire in the direction of the compound. Since I am not sure if Brilla has noticed him, I am forced to let him know. Halfway to his position, I see the old warrior coming toward me and turn around to go back toward Hocker's post along the main road, where I suspect he left the pail of lard. My suspicions are confirmed. A little later, we separate and make our way back to the compound along both sides of the camp road. At the entrance to the compound, Hocker meets us with hands in his pants pockets and a smug smile on his face. Schultz squats on the ground, staring into the breaking grey of a new day, unenthused about the bounty we set before him. "Don't think that I will stay behind the next time," he moans in relief like a woman in childbirth who has just withstood the first labour pains. "Take it easy, Schultz, and eat up. One of us must survive when we face death, so that the future world will know how its sons decayed," Hocker whispers to him as he loosens the lid of the pail, and I reach into the box. Here, on the edge of Alençon, in the middle of 15,000 hungry captured German soldiers, 4 men, 4 soldiers sit in the dawn of September 4th, 1944, crying like children while working away on the cracker bread and lard stolen under the most dangerous of circumstances. No one is ashamed of himself in front of the others, but everyone is there for the other. At 11 o'clock the whistle sounds to get our provisions. Sleepy and quite awkwardly, Schultz gets to his feet. "It is useless to ask you if you want to go up today," he says, yawning. "I want to go with you today for sure," Hocker grins. "Let's all go," I suggest, looking forward to seeing Genghis Khan. I step into the tent and observe the fellows from whom Hocker stole the bread and lard. Even to this hour they have observed nothing. The prisoners work diligently with sweat on their faces. The tall American provokes them, throwing the ugliest abusive words over their heads. "You goddamn son of a bitch!" he lets fly at a lame German who drops a box from the table. The man does not react any more to the barrage of curses from the Yankee than to simply grin like a coolie and work faster. It is terrible how the fear of hunger alone can change a man and can make him into a willing tool of his oppressors. If they continue to be so stingy with provisions, then in a few weeks they will have broken the backs of the strongest among us and degraded us to helpless good-for-nothings. Even this time I remain mute, since the entire allotment can be carried by 3 men. Hocker, Briller and I follow the carriers as escort personnel, and find enough time to consider in the light of day the theatre of our last night's adventure. It easily could have gone bad. But as always in such situations, there were a number of favourable circumstances which made the theft possible. Hocker will not try it a second time. As nice as it is to be full once again, to get a bullet in your hide for a pail of lard and some cracker bread is stupid, because there is no return from the world beyond. It is 10 o'clock, and still sleep escapes us. For hours, the last of our carefully saved cigarettes has gone up in blue smoke. Everyone is busy with himself. We lie on our backs and await with fear the first raindrops to hit our faces. What will happen to us when it begins to rain? It is an unimaginable thought that the Americans will let us sink into the morass. Perhaps it would have been better if I had supported Hocker's suggestion to go to the Americans, instead of lying in our foul skin and allowing ourselves to be pumped up with false hopes. Even if they had turned us away, it is always better to try something than to do nothing at all. However, my self-accusations come too late. The heavens open their sluices without mercy. The first drops thump on the packed and dried-out ground, and begin to unite in little rivulets and swell to streams in a few minutes. The cans that we have saved stand on the rim of the drainage ditch, ready to catch the much-desired drinking water. We sit under Schultz's coat, our legs pulled up, and listen to the tinny clank as the precious drops of water hit the cans, clanging like music in our ears. Our arms stretch out from the protective roof, reaching for the cans. The refreshing moisture almost sizzles on the tongue. Those who share our fate are hopping around the compound at this late hour, like happy children at play, paying no attention at all to their wet clothes as they gulp down the wet rainwater. The ground of the compound is softened up, and the sleeping places are changed into sticky mud. There is no dry place where the tired body can find rest. In groups of 3, 5, and 7 men, the prisoners stand pressed close to one another and hold their completely soaked field blouses, which hang like wet mop rags over their heads. And still the rain gushes down to the earth. The air has cooled off. Chilled, we 4 friends snuggle tightly together, squatting on our boot heels in order to keep the water away from our camping place. Despite our hurriedly dug drainage channels, the water still quickly spreads over our grassy area. We eat cracker bread and lard. In disbelief, we look into the box whose contents, now threatened by the water, is nearly gone. This evening, at the latest, the booty from our robbery will be gone. Unlimited grief penetrates our hearts, while the sky continues without mercy to shower its water down upon us. Schultz's coat, which has long been soaked, no longer offers any protection. It is senseless to remain in this position any longer. Standing upright, we wait patiently, like cattle in the meadow, for a change for the better. The 12th of September, 1944. 8 terrible days have passed. 8 horrible nights lie behind us. The rain has stopped. Clothed in wet, now steaming uniforms, we work in defiance of death to put up the tents that arrived early this morning. Prudently, the Americans provide better nourishment to the work details who are busy in several enclosures erecting the heavy tents. There is enough to do to make the new accommodations weather-tight. Drainage ditches must be dug around the tents. Stakes must be driven into the ground, and the tents securely tied to them. Above all, the foot-deep mud which has built up in the last days must be taken out from inside the tents and dumped behind the latrine. But there is no complaining to be heard, even though all the work must be done with tin cans. Shortly before 7 o'clock, 12 large tents stand in our compound that are still too small to provide 247 men with enough room to sleep. Fortunately, Schultz had the wisdom to organize the tent communities before the work began, leaving it up to the various groups to decide who would occupy the tents, so that no circles of friends would be separated to sow seeds of future strife. It remains up to the individual communities to organize themselves in the narrow space that is available. As the work detail informs us, one of these tents is used as quarters by 12 American soldiers. That means that we must find room inside the slanting walls for more than twice as many men. After 5 minutes, the testing of the space is over and everyone knows his place. Most important is that we finally have a roof over our heads. While we were erecting the brand new and obviously expensive tents, through carelessness, a 3-foot-long rip was made in the tent roof. While we Germans stood stiff with shock staring at the gaping hole in the tent, the sergeant said, "It's okay, go ahead," and sent an American GI to get some material to repair it. Every German soldier can imagine for himself what kind of thunder and lightning a comparable German sergeant would bring down. Somehow the American soldiers take such things easier, or if you will, are much more generous about it than we, which probably is connected with the natural richness of their country. "Is everyone taken care of?" Schultz asks after there is quiet in the tent. "Yes, yes, Staff Sergeant." We sound like a choir. "Then good night." "Good night." The 15th of September, 1944. A sheer intolerable heat weighs heavily on our tent, even though it is only 9 o'clock in the morning. Hardened by the long time out of doors, I now find the air in the tent suffocating. My comrades still lie with closed eyes between consciousness and their dreams. So as not to disturb anyone, I get up carefully and slip out of our quarters. There is a wonderful sun shining over the tent city. Here and there blue smoke rises between the dark grey-green tents of the camp, indicating the well-being of the people, even though thick concertina wire restricts their movement. At all 4 corners of the gigantic camp, there are small wooden houses built upon posts several feet high, occupied by American soldiers who watch the activities of their fellow men and halt the surge for freedom with short but well-aimed bursts from their machine guns. Shame on you, I think, as I sit on the top of the drainage ditch and cross my legs. Not exactly sure of the day's date, I reach for my fountain pen and in a few minutes forget everything around me as I become preoccupied writing my diary. It doesn't matter to us whether it is Tuesday or Sunday. There is no sound, no report of what is going on in the world, and that works on our sad existence. Only gossip and latrine rumours reach the ear as they slip uncontrolled from compound to compound through the narrow strands of the barbed wire. "You are writing?" Schultz asks from the corner of the tent after I have spent 2 hours alone. "Be so good and write down everything that I am going to tell you." He interrupts me and hands me a sheet of white paper. "Where did you get this paper?" I ask in amazement. "From the Americans," he explains happily. "From the Americans? How and what for?" I ask, still amazed. "There was a meeting for the compound leaders with the sergeant," he begins. We put some heat under his chair. Now we are supposed to write down our wishes and he will pass them on to the commander. By the way, Genghis Khan is no longer the leader. He is going to be taken with 100 men to another camp today. At the moment he is standing next to Compound 1 with a full CSAC and chain smoking. Like wildfire, the news about Genghis Khan spreads throughout the camp while I complete the wish list with Schultz. No one is promising anything will come from the wish lists. They will be filled out, turned in, and finally thrown into an American garbage can. Hunger will remain our true companion. Blankets and coats are requested. Underwear, handkerchiefs, and shaving equipment are included in the wish list. The amount of water and provisions should be increased. Oh, paper, how patient you are. At 11 o'clock, the food carriers bring sauerkraut and cracker bread. "Poor Hocker, you must count the strands before you divide it up," I tease him regardless of my own depression. "I am nearly finished," he indicates, opening the flat round cans. "I will simply hang 4 strands on the ears, give them a slice of cracker bread, and you will see how proudly they march away. You don't need to watch out. No one will come a second time because it takes more calories to come up and get it than receive. You?" The double rows follow our dialogue with questioning glances. Watch out that you don't confuse the sauerkraut with your beard and swallow it down. The third one in line cannot resist pulling my leg. That won't happen to you with your billy goat's beard. I bring the laughter to my side as this comparison hits the target exactly. Once again, Schultz stands with a strict face next to Hocker and Briller during the distribution of the provisions. And once again, the distrustful prisoners eye the food. It is sauerkraut and cracker bread, taken as booty from the German army supplies in the bunkers along the Atlantic Wall. We have nothing against the origin, and also nothing against the kind of food on today's special menu. We are easily satisfied. The one and only issue is the small amount of food, which is not enough to live on, only enough for a long and slow death. The first sick in our compound are already lying in the tents. They are supposed to be putting up a sick bay in the main camp up by the barracks. The German doctor is supposed to have spoken to the Americans. No one knows for sure. But we don't believe any of the prattle because usually within an hour the rumours burst like a soap bubble. But now life is coming into the camp. American guards cross the grounds going toward the provisions tent. "Compounds 1 through 3, step out to the camp road," a fat American bellows in poor German. Quickly Hocker, Briller and I hurry out of our compound across the camp road and work our way through the several enclosures to the compound opposite Compound 1. We believe the prisoners will be searched, and Genghis Khan has a wonderfully filled sea-sack whose contents we would like to see very much. Slowly the street fills with the men from Compounds 1, 2 and 3. We are amazed at the baggage that some of the prisoners of war carry with them. There are people with completely filled backpacks. There are men with suitcases looking as though the Americans had taken them away from their vacation, and they all fear that the grinning Americans will take their possessions. At their head, clothed in the blue coat of the Navy, proudly decorated with the Iron Cross First Class, and with a thick American sea-sack between his legs, stands Genghis Khan, the man from Vienna. "The first 3 men, let's go," the leader of the Americans calls. The rows begin to move. The first 3 men step lazily toward the Americans. "Put it down and open it." The American orders Genghis Khan, who, in contrast to the poor devils to his right and left, still has his sea-sack on his shoulder and makes no attempt to put down his bag and open it to be searched. Before he has the string untied with which the bag is fastened, the searcher's nimble fingers are into his clothing and disappear into his pockets. What they pull out in a few handfuls would, in this the 5th year of war, fill any European jeweller with enthusiasm. Watches and rings in every possible form and price range, lighters, cigarette cases and fountain pens in large numbers, to the delight of onlookers from both nations, are spread out before his feet. The Americans make short work of the sea-sack, as Genghis Khan reluctantly takes out an olive-green blanket packed on top. In a sudden movement, an American grabs the sack, lifts it up, and dumps the entire contents out onto the ground. There are items we have never seen before: cans of corned beef, white bread, creations, cans of meat and beans, which offer an amazing picture for the hungry prisoners. The Americans look at the pile of provisions indifferently and give their full attention to the valuables, which their leader sorts through and holds up in his hand a wristwatch for the others to see, then shoves the watch into his pocket and pulls out a handkerchief with which he blows his nose. "That's not your property." The leader turns to Genghis Khan and sticks the handkerchief back in his pants pocket. "I bought it," Genghis Khan stammers, downtrodden as he sees how the Americans are loading his goods into a box and setting them to the side. "Shut up and go forward." He dominates him and gives him a shove so that he nearly trips over his own feet. "Stop!" a lance corporal suddenly calls from Compound 1. It is my Iron Cross First Class that he is wearing. "What is the matter?" the leader asks in confusion at the turmoil. "The Iron Cross is the property of this man," I translate quickly, and point with my finger into Compound 1. "Okay, you get it again." The American reacts immediately with warmth in his voice, and waves to the lance corporal to come, while at the same time he demands the Iron Cross from Genghis Khan, which he takes off his jacket with a dirty grin. Nearly ceremoniously he hands the decoration over to the German prisoner, who receives it happily and disappears back into the crowd. "Goodbye, Genghis Khan," those remaining behind bellow. "I'll see you in hell," he waves back sarcastically. "We are rid of him, Robert," I express, satisfied, turning to Briller while we remain spared by the Americans for the moment, and make our way back along the road toward our compound. There, Schultz listens with only partial interest to our report. It always depends on the individual what he makes out of the situation. He lectures us at the end while looking at a picture on his knee of his wife, who holds a charming, pretty young girl of about 5 years in her lap. "Is that your wife, Schultz?" I ask, to which he responds with a tired nod of the head. "Yes," he says while looking through me. And my child. Hopefully she is doing better. She is somewhat sickly and quite fragile. Can I see it? I ask, now interested. Yes, go ahead. You cannot make her vanish. He forces a laugh and hands me the picture. Are you jealous, Schultz? I ask him, amazed as I now observe a new side of this usually self-confident man without looking at the picture in my hand. Take a look at her first, Helmut, and don't talk about jealousy. I really don't have any, he indicates, somehow becoming uncertain, which amazes me even more and stimulates my curiosity, as I now hold the picture in my hand before my eyes. Man alive! I exclaim unintentionally as my eyes view the colour-painted photo. Although before I had not paid much attention to the picture on Schultz's knee, the blonde locks of the child did intrigue me. But now I am really surprised at the full-formed woman whose expression-filled, nearly green eyes rest upon my own. In a charming oval face, framed by magnificent blonde hair, there is a mouth which creates a longing in me. The slightly opened lips disclose a row of small, pearl-like teeth that sparkle with good health. The white neck, which is graced by a skin-thin gold necklace, carries in all majesty this exceptionally beautiful woman's head. While we were away, were you thinking about home? I ask him as I give the picture back. That's right, my boy. So often one has his private sorrows which push themselves into the foreground when one is alone, he explains. It is not curiosity, Comrade Schultz. Perhaps I am too young for you. But if you are being tormented by some sorrow, wouldn't it be better for you to talk about it? I don't believe that your sorrows can be so tragic and unusual that we cannot speak about them and perhaps offer some advice. I encourage him to empty his heart. I told you that my wife is sick. Shortly before I was captured, I received a letter in which she informed me that she would be operated on the 17th or 18th of August. That is everything. You can imagine how much that troubles a person, he maintains as one friend to another. That certainly is a worry that must be carried. There is nothing more that we can do than to hope with you that everything went well, and that your charming wife and the mother of your sweet child might be preserved. I tell him with deep feeling for the situation. Thank you for your understanding and your concern, but don't let it spoil your joy over the departure of Genghis Khan. He indicates somewhat absent-mindedly, as each one of us shakes his hand, and he puts the picture of his wife away. She is more than beautiful, your wife Schultz, but there is always something foul about wives. Briller inconsiderately tramples, with his unusual hate/love complex, the tender feelings Schultz has for his sick wife. You are carrying your damn hate too far, Robert. You can't simply deride feelings that are holy to someone else. I get after him before Schultz can answer. In general, he is right. Schultz, much to my surprise, comes to Briller's defense. But men must bear part of the guilt themselves. Now you have made me curious, friend. Speak up. What is it with your wife? I ask him, relaxed. Nothing unusual. I only loved her too much to give her up, the big man answers bitterly, and he tries to lead a ladybug that has just landed on his hand away with a blade of grass. How am I to understand that? One does not give up what he loves, especially when it is his wife who also shows him love. I attempt to tear the secret from him. Don't demand of me that I reveal bedroom secrets. Be satisfied when I tell you that my wife was very foolish before I got acquainted with her, and even though I knew it, I still married her because my heart forced me to. Our love has continued unchanged, but we have had to pay for it. Then I have a sick wife, and she has a man who is not very happy. It requires a large measure of tact and goodness of heart not to bring out these shadows of the past at every appropriate and inappropriate opportunity, and thereby cause the martyrdom from both sides of this relationship, which is already built on a shaky foundation. The necessary operation came as a consequence of my wife's earlier indiscretions, and my only fault is that I knew about it from the beginning, and I still married her. So that I can be spared your pity in the future, you should know that I do not regret it. But today I would do exactly the same thing. Now leave me alone for 10 minutes, and please don't laugh at me. Otherwise our comradeship will come to an end. He smiles painfully in conclusion. Now I would smoke a cigarette if I had one, I say to Briller as he looks toward the rusty barbed wire as though the world were lost. And I would drink a bottle of cognac empty in order to forget this shitty life. The brave farm boy sighs. His thoughts are at home as I speak to him, and I conclude not to disturb him any more. The 18th of September, 1944. Today we are to be registered. We stand on the grounds of the US tent camp and have the opportunity to wonder at the good functioning organization of the Americans, which is the equal to anything in the German army. When I report my birth date, the American clerk who had been so deep in his work suddenly looks up at me with interested eyes and says, "Your birthday is today," and then continues to pound away at the keys of his typewriter. "Okay, take it easy." He sends me off with a snap of the fingers and hands me my prisoner of war number, under which I will be registered with the Americans from now on throughout all eternity. "Today is your birthday, Helmut." My companions congratulate me once we return to the grounds. "Why did you keep it a secret?" "Unfortunately, I did not know for sure that today is the 18th. 4 soldiers from a work detail accompanied by an American enter our compound. Equipped with shovels and picks, they pass by me quickly and follow the way to the latrine. One of them has a roll of copper tubing hanging on his shoulder. Curiously, I follow him and observe them from a respectable distance as they stop at the latrine, lie down their tools and take off their shirts. But it is not their work as such which interests me, since it is immediately clear to me that they are going to dig a new hole. But the copper tubing has worked on me and brought me to a fantastic idea. I approach the group as it begins to work. "Do you want to help us?" the guard asks in a sarcastic voice when he becomes aware of my presence. But I act dumb and laughingly shrug my shoulders. "Do you want to help us?" A chubby-faced soldier translates the American's well-understood question. "I have become too weak for such things," I wave tiredly to him. "Sergeants can only show off," a lance corporal bawls as his 7 years of service can be distinguished at some distance. "Keep your mouth shut. You are just jealous because you have not amounted to anything." Another spares me an answer. "Go ahead." The American fortunately interrupts the unpleasant conversation. "Lick my arse," the lance corporal spouts to the guard and angrily swings his pick into the earth and begins to work like a wild man. "Do you have a toilet, or do you also shit on your billy club?" the red-cheeked prisoner asks the American in a kidding tone after a long pause. "Yes," the guard says unknowingly, to which they all break out in frantic laughter, and the Yankee irritatedly chews his gum. "Hey, what are you going to do with the copper tubing?" I decide that the time has come and throw out the question that has been burning on my tongue. "So that the latrines can be fenced in and the side toward the outside of the camp covered with a tent canvas in order to spoil the desire of the French for looking at the asses of German boys," the staff sergeant, who was so spiteful before, volunteers freely. "That is exactly right." Another confirms his words as I furrow my brow in doubt. "Tell me, do you think you could pass me a piece of the wire without the guard seeing it?" I finally lie my wish on one card. "Of course we can. It just depends on what you are going to lie next to it, my dear fellow. If it is necessary, I will take the American's gum out of his mouth and let him continue to chew on a condom without arousing his attention," the big-mouthed lance corporal answers. "Lay something down." I respond, "Can you reach into the pants pockets of a naked man?" "Oh, well, you do have something." He remains hard-headed. "How about 3 razor blades?" I ask jokingly. "All right, but they must be as new as the wire." He agrees to the offer. "You will be through in an hour. Before then I will be back with the razor blades." I turn toward my tent. "Your tubing is even with the earth under the pile of dirt," the old fellow whispers to me as I shake his hand and pass to him the razor blades. "It's in order. Greet the homeland for me," I continue loudly, and return happily to the tent where I persuade my 3 companions to make a round of the compound with me.